Hello and welcome to part 16 of this Kerbal Space Program 2 for Science video series. So in part 15, if you've seen that, you'll know that we landed near the Tylo Monument and we had to go for one hell of a drive, not one hell of a dive as I wrote on the actual flag, but one hell of a drive to get to the actual monument. Now, as you can see, for this one, I've already driven us all the way back to the lander and reboarded the Kerbals. Now, in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be returning to Kerbin, which of course will involve us launching and rendezvousing and docking with the actual command module in orbit. However, normally I like to try and do something different in all of my videos, and I was thinking about this one, and I was thinking that there wasn't really much different to do if I was to do it in my normal manner. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to try a different attempt to actually rendezvous with the command module, which is called Direct Ascent to Rendezvous. And what that basically means is that when we launch the lander, we will be launching it at just the right time. So once we reach our apoapsis, the command module would just be passing over the top of where we are at the moment. And it's a much quicker way to actually get to the target ship. However, it does require the correct timing, but we'll get into that in a moment, because the first thing we need to do is we actually need to set up our rover. Because if we were to leave it in its current configuration, what would happen is it would constantly be running out of electric charge, and we would always be getting the alerts to say that that is happening, which can be highly frustrating. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn everything off on the rover to start off with. So we'll start off by turning off the brake lights. We're also going to make sure the reaction wheel is turned off, and that the rover mate is set to hibernate, because then it shouldn't be using any electricity, or very little, in which case the solar panel should be able to keep it relatively well charged. And just to make sure that it doesn't bounce every time we do any warp, we're also going to just reduce the spring and damper strength, just to make sure that it stays relatively stable on the surface. So yeah, now that is set, we need to actually start thinking about launching to the target ship. So the first thing we'll do then is we'll go onto the map. We will find the target ship, which is there, and we're going to right click on that and set that as the target. And then we're also going to hit control with that as well, because if we look at the map, you can see that our orbit is currently heading quite a bit over the top of the target ship, or the lander. So we need to reduce our inclination so we're actually flying right over the top of it. So naturally, the first thing we'll do then is we will create a manoeuvre at 90 degrees from where the target is. And then we're just going to lower our inclination down. So as I say, we will be flying straight over the top of it. There we go. Now that's done, we can point at the manoeuvre and perform this burn. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back onto the map, and we're actually going to create another manoeuvre just ahead or just past our actual lander. So we'll pop the manoeuvre there, and we're not actually wanting to create a manoeuvre here, we're only wanting the actual timer. Because I've worked out that with this particular setup, so our command module is at about 50-ish kilometers above the surface. We want to be launching our lander at about 1 minute and 30 seconds before the command module will be flying over the top of it. Now, that time will depend on various things, such as the thruster weight of the actual lander and also the height of the orbit. So of course, if it's in a higher orbit, you'll need to launch a little bit earlier, and if it's got a lower thruster weight ratio on the lander, then you'll need to launch even earlier for that. But a couple of attempts, a couple of practices should, you should be able to find a way to do it quite easily. But like I say, in this particular case, the time is going to be at 1 minute and 30 seconds. So we will warp forwards until our start burn timer reaches about 2 minutes-ish. And And the reason for that is now I'm going to look at the clock at the bottom here, and we're going to keep an eye on the seconds, and we can see that once we reach 40 seconds or 1 minute 40 on here, we are at 1 minute and 12 or we're at 12 seconds there. So we know we need to be launching at about 22 seconds. So we'll make sure we are controlling the lander. And once this timer reaches 22 seconds, we'll go to full throttle, and we are going to pitch straight down to 45 degrees on the nav ball as well. Now you can see the anti-target marker is right there on the nav ball, so we know we need to be going a little bit to the left of the 90 degree mark, or the 90 degree line on the nav ball. And now what we'll do is we'll go back to the map, because what we're going to wait for is we're going to wait until our apoapsis reaches the target ship's orbit line. And you can see our intersect markers have already shown up. Now we're getting nice and close. What we're going to do now is we're not even going to pay any attention to these, because we're going to go back to the flight view. We're going to have a look around and make sure that the actual target marker is showing up, and that's the Rover, and we need to make sure that is showing up, because if you press F4 it will turn it off. So we need that because we need to be able to see when our the command module is actually coming towards us. So what we'll do is we'll wait until that shows up, and then once it reaches about 25 kilometers in distance, we will then start performing our rendezvous burn. But before we can do that, we obviously need to make sure our velocity is set to target, and we will then point ourselves at retrograde in relation to the target ship, which technically is a prograde burn. But this will then, like I say, once the actual distance to target reaches about 25 kilometers, we'll start our burn, and that should slow us down so that just as the ship is passing us, we will be basically matching our orbit to it. So, like I say, we'll warp forwards carefully until it shows up, and there it is. And you can see it is approaching us at quite one hell of a lick. So, like I say, once this reaches 25 kilometers, we'll go to full throttle. And then, as I mentioned, once it starts to pass below us or next to us, we should actually be reducing our target velocity or relative velocity to the target to about 0 meters per second. And now we are there, what we can do is we can now point at the target, and because it's about 2 kilometers away, I'm going to go up to probably around about 10 meters per second. Although we've gone a little bit far, but that doesn't matter. Now, if you've seen the build video, you'll know that this lander can doesn't actually have any RCS thrusters on it, so we are going to need to do our final adjustments with the actual target ship or the command module itself. But we'll get into that in a moment, because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to warp forwards until the two start to get close to one another. And then what we're going to do is we're going to point this rocket back to retrograde in relation to the target. I'm also going to right click on the engine and reduce the thrust limiter to about 10%. And then we're going to slow ourselves back down to about 0 meters per second once we start to reach around about 150 meters from the target. So it looks like it's going to fly straight below us, so we'll reduce our relative velocity now. Then what we can do is, once again, we'll point at the target ship, and we will start our approach, and we'll go to about 2.5 meters per second for this one. There we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the square bracket button to switch to the command module. We're going to have a look around and find our lander, and once it gets close enough, we will be able to actually right click on the lander and set the docking port as our target. So we'll get rid of the actual target marker and warp until the two are starting to get close enough together that we can actually highlight any part of the lander. And you can see we can do that there, so we'll right click on any part of it, go to coupling, hit the Clampetron docking port and set that as the target. And then if we activate SAS, we can point ourselves towards the target, make sure our velocity bug is set to target as well. and then we will use RCS on this to make sure that the green prograde marker is inside of the target marker. Now we're also going to just reduce our approach speed to about 1 meter per second, because if we're going too fast then the two can bounce off of each other, and we also risk breaking the docking ports. But yeah, now all we need to do is wait until they actually dock with one another. And there we go. Like I say, that is a technique called Direct Ascent to Rendezvous, or at least I believe that's what it's called. That's what I call it anyway. And it's just a little bit easier and a little bit quicker than having to go into orbit, wait until the two ships actually meet up, and then do the rendezvous that way. And like I say, the timing does depend on a few things, such as the height of the target ship and the actual thrust capabilities of the lander can. But now that is done, what we'll do is we'll first of all move our Kerbals back into the command module. And then we're going to undock the lander can. And as I've said in the past, we are going to essentially leave this in orbit as a kind of relay satellite. So we will open up the antenna so we can actually communicate with the KSC. And then I'm also going to activate SCS and point it to prograde. And we can do this now because it does have a guidance unit on it, so it is actually controllable without any Kerbals in. And then I'm going to just increase the throttle and get ourselves up to about 100 kilometers above the surface with our apoapsis. The reason I'm doing this is it just makes it a little bit easier in the future when we're trying to find out which ship is the one we actually want. But yeah, now we are ready to actually think about getting back to Kerbin. So in the past few videos that I've done where we've been returning to Kerbin, what I would normally do is I would increase our apoapsis so we are just leaving the planet's sphere of influence, and in this case it's obviously Jool, which would put us into roughly the same orbital path around Kerbal as the actual planet, at which point we could just place a manoeuvre, reduce our periapsis towards Kerbin and find an encounter that way. However, it is by far the, well, it's not the most efficient way to do it. I've found in my test that it would cost probably over 3,000 Delta V to do it that way. And even though we've got nearly 4,000 in this, so we could do it, I'm actually going to try and see if we can't get an encounter straight back from where we are right now. Now, ordinarily, what we'd want to do when going back from a planet is we'd want to get them in the correct transfer window, and for that, with Jool, what we'd want is we want to have Kerbin at 3 o'clock on its orbit, and then we want to get Jool at somewhere around about 45 degrees ahead, so somewhere around there. So basically, if that was 12 o'clock and that was 3 o'clock, we'd want Jool to essentially be at about 1:30. But I have tried it that way coming straight from Tylo, and I could never get a reliable encounter, so I'm actually going to do it from where we are right now. So yeah, we'll go back to our ship. And the first thing we want to do is we actually want to move Tylo around so it's around about the prograde line of Jool's orbit. So, because of course we want to be getting ourselves lower, so we need to be burning retrograde in relation to Jool's direction of travel. So we'll go back to the tracking station so we can actually do this, and of course we need to go to the Kerbal Space Center first and then into the tracking station. And then once we're there, we'll hit the little arrow next to Jool, we'll go down to Tylo and focus on that. And then, like I say, we're going to just warp forwards till Tylo is somewhere around about the prograde line of Jool, which is obviously the thicker of the two. Now, we could, when doing this, we could have actually gone to the lander because it is on the surface. And going to a ship that's on the surface would give us the full warp as well. However, I have found doing that quite often the rover will actually fall through the surface of Jool, which is less than ideal because then we can't actually leave the rover and get back to our ship. And we also want to try and keep the rover, so hopefully doing that won't have messed that up. But now we will focus back on Tylo. And we're going to try and find the correct ship. And we know that the ship we want is the one that's in the lower orbit. So we can see that that one is actually going up into the higher orbit. So we know that this is the one we actually want. We can tell it's the one we want because it's got the crew on it. So we'll hit control. And then what we're going to do is we will go back onto the map. And we will create the manoeuvre. We're actually going to create it around about 90 degrees ahead of the retrograde line for Tylo, because ordinarily we would want to be burning prograde in relation to Tylo's direction of travel to get higher. However, if we're going all the way back down to Kerbin, then doing it like that won't necessarily work so well. So what we'll do is we'll create our manoeuvre here. And this way we're essentially going to be burning in towards Joule, which might not be the most efficient way to do it. However, we will see in a moment that it is a lot more efficient doing it this way than it is actually going into orbit around Kerbal and then getting back down. So we'll make sure that we are leaving Joule somewhere around its point of, or its retrograde line. We'll right click on Kerbin and set that as the target. And then we're just going to keep reducing our periapsis around Kerbal until we actually get an encounter, or at least a close approach with Kerbin. You can see now our one and our first point of intersect markers aren't very close together. So what we'll do is we will play around with our arrows until we get the second point of encounter. You can see even they're not that close together. So we'll keep moving our manoeuvre around because you can see we're actually leaving Joule at a less than desirable angle. So we'll move the manoeuvre node around until we are actually leaving Joule somewhere around its prograde or retrograde line. You can tell which one's which because it's the bigger of the two flashing circles. And we'll have another look at our encounter with Kerbin, and we're just going to keep doing this until we actually get down towards Kerbin's sphere of influence. And there was one time where I actually got an encounter with Kerbin almost straight away, although typically I forgot to actually make a note of what the actual phase angles were, so I wish I'd have done that because then we'd have actually been able to get an encounter much easier. But we'll keep playing around and seeing how close we can get. And then what we're going to do is once we've done this, we'll actually create a mid-course correction to actually get down towards Kerbin properly, because we're essentially forcing an encounter now. So you know what, I'm going to go a little bit further, and you can see our two markers are actually getting quite close there, and this is only using about 1400 delta V, whereas as I said before we would have been using almost 3000 to do it in the multiple steps. So we're going to leave it at that, and then like I say, we're actually going to create a mid-course correction to bring it down, because if we focus on Kerbal and have a look, we can see the problem with the second point of intersect markers is that the inclination is way out, so we're going to need to mess around with that. But the best way to, or the best time to do that would be on a mid-course correction. So now that is set, we can point at this manoeuvre and perform this burn as well. Now that is set. As I say, we are going to create a mid-course correction, so we are already well on our way out of Joule, and to be honest that isn't the best phase angle in relation to Joule's orbit, but it'll do. So yeah, what we'll do then is we'll create another manoeuvre about halfway between Joule and our periapsis. So we're going to create it around there, and like I say, we're now going to play around to actually get the second point of intersect markers to actually meet up. This once again is probably going to cost a few hundred delta V, but as I said, it is going to be a lot cheaper than if we were to have attempted to do it straight from from orbit around Kerbal. I'm just going to play around with the purple and the green arrows until we get our actual encounter with Kerbin, which you can see we're getting there. And now if we focus on Kerbin, we can try and fine-tune it and get ourselves nice and close. You can see this burn is going to cost us about 500 delta V, so once again it's not as efficient as say if we were to have actually got the optimal transfer window. However, it is a little bit more efficient than if we had done my usual technique of just skipping out of Joule's sphere of influence and actually getting an encounter that way from Kerbal orbit. But yeah, this time I think what I might do is I might actually go straight into Kerbin's atmosphere, because the Delta V, I believe, is actually calculating using the puff engines that we have. So although we do have enough to get back with a lot of ease, there is also a chance that we won't. Well, it'll take a long time to actually burn to get in, so I'm actually going to aim to go straight into Kerbin's sphere of influence, and it is going to give us a much hotter and much faster re-entry, but this way we know we're definitely going to get an encounter or a capture at least. So yeah, now that is set, we can perform this burn. I'm just going to make sure we are on the map and focused on Kerbin, so we can actually cut the throttle at the correct time, because otherwise there's a good chance we'll end up skipping straight through. And as you can see, the manoeuvres aren't always 100% accurate, so to fix this, what we'll do is, as usual, we'll point ourselves at prograde on the nav ball. And then we will orient the nav ball so that it is pointed, well, the top of the nav ball is pointed towards the top of the nav ball. And then we'll just use RCS just to bring ourselves down towards Kerbin's actual atmosphere. Yeah, 3847 should do. We can do a slight deceleration burn when we get there, although like I say, it is saying we've got 1800 Delta V, but I'm pretty sure that that is including the puff engines in there as well, which we haven't even used in this mission, I don't think, yet. But now that is set, what we can do is we can zoom out and we can warp towards Kerbin. We'll make sure we are on the correct orbit line, which is the bottom of the two. Time warped point. Now we're getting close, we can make sure we're inside of Kerbin's sphere of influence. As usual, I'm just going to create a manoeuvre a little way ahead of our entry and actually burn the engines, and I'll burn this tank at least until it's empty. So let's focus on Kerbin. Let's create the manoeuvre. I'm just going to try and see what happens when we go to the full 1842. And you can see it's saying it would be a 6-minute 35 burn, which to me says that we are definitely using the puff engines. And also you can see the little plus there as well, and what that means is when you get a plus on your red, or the red part of your trajectory, that basically means that is when you are moving on to the next stage. So we are definitely using the puff engines for that. So I'm just going to leave it there, and I'm probably only going to burn the hydrogen engines and get ourselves in that way. So yeah, let's point at this manoeuvre and perform our final re-entry burn, and then we will be able to actually get back to Kerbin, hopefully relatively safely. Although like I say, it is going to be quite a hot re-entry. It's probably going to be the fastest re-entry we've had so far in this series. So yeah, you can see now that that engine is empty, or that tank is empty. It still says we've got 625 Delta V. So our periapsis is at 27 kilometers, and I want to get that down to about 25. So I have the puff engines, which are these two little ones here. I have them set to an action group, so I'm just going to press 2 to activate those. Now you can see they're fired up, and we're just going to keep burning those until we reach about 25 kilometers above the surface. And the great thing about the puff engines is, even though they are RCS, we can actually warp when using these. So we're going to do that. Like I say, once we have reached about 25 kilometers, we will cut the throttle, and we are starting to get close to re-entry as well, so we need to make sure that we are ditching the tank. So we'll point ourselves at, oh dear, that's not very good. Oh, we're just gonna, you know what, I'm just gonna straight up ditch that and go straight to retrograde, because we definitely don't want to be losing the command pod. But you can see that just shows how fast our re-entry is. We're still over 5,000 meters per second at the minute, which is by far the fastest and hottest re-entry we've had. So we'll get rid of the manoeuvre node and we'll just wait until we've actually done the re-entry. Now, for some reason, the heat shield doesn't actually seem to do any ablation, which is strange. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just a fault with this particular heat shield. But anyway, like I say, we're just going to wait until the re-entry heating effects have finished. Once that's done, we can activate the drogue chutes. We'll make sure our altimeter is set to ground as well, just so that we know exactly how high we are from the surface. But it looks like we are coming in over the water at the minute, which we are, so it wouldn't make much of a difference. Then, like always, once we reach 1,000 meters, we will use the action group that we set up in the build guide to actually, you know, cut the drogue chutes and deploy the mains. Right, and now that is done, it's time to recover the vessel and see how much science we got. So yeah, let's first of all start off by going to the Mission Control Centre and submitting the reports. And because there was a rover on that rocket, when we launched it onto the pad, we also got the wheeling and dealing mission as well, so we'll submit that. And as I've said before, if you want to read all of that stuff, then feel free to do so in your own time, but I'm just going to skip through them all. We'll submit the Tylo Monument one as well. And yeah, that is it for the main missions. As you can see, we only have secondary missions left now. So naturally, we've still got the second dibs one left to submit. But like I say, I'm going to wait until we actually plant a flag on pole with that. But we have several new missions now. So we've got a Frosty Mug, which requires us to enter Elu's Sphere of Influence. Tertiary Dibs, which is plant a flag on the Eye of Drez. And then Curb Wide Torque Happy Rock, which I might actually do that one next because I have been playing around with a couple of aeroplane designs. So let me know if you'd like to do that one next. And then it came from Lathe as well, which is obtain a sample report from the strange creature on Lathe. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is for the actual main missions with this game at the moment. All we have to do is make our way through the secondary missions. So like I say, I'm thinking I might do the Cappy Rock one next, because I have been playing around with aeroplanes. So if you'd like me to do that one, then just let me know in the comments. If you'd like me to try and see if I can work out how to do it with a suborbital rocket as well, then let me know. Although I've never done that, and I'm not that great when it comes to actually doing accurate landings in atmosphere, so that one might take a little while longer to work out. But yeah, that's everything there is then for the main mission. So I have been going pretty hard with this game for the past few weeks now, doing all these missions in these videos, so I might actually take a little bit of a break from it now. Obviously, I will do all of these missions in time. I might see if I can maybe do a video a week, or maybe once every couple of weeks from now on. But yeah, I'd first of all like to thank everybody who has subscribed to the channel over the past few weeks. When I reached 100 subscribers on Christmas Day, I was really overwhelmed by that because I wasn't expecting it. And in that time, I'm over 800 now. I'm getting closer and closer to 1,000 subscribers. So I do really appreciate all of the subscriptions I've had. And I also, of course, appreciate all of the comments, although I'm not very good at keeping up with comments. So if you've left a comment on any of my earlier videos that I haven't responded to, then I'm probably going to have a look through them at some point and maybe see what I can do with regards to responding to all of the comments. But yeah, like I say, I'd really like to thank everybody who has supported this series so far. Like I say, this isn't the very last video, although I might take a little bit of a break for the time being for a little while. And yeah, then we will eventually get all of these missions done. But like I say, I'd really like to thank everybody who has subscribed and commented and liked on all of my videos. And if you enjoyed this one, I would also appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe and maybe leave a comment. And hopefully I will see you in the next one.